change.
Well, it's welcome Lee, welcome Marilyn. It's 3 minutes after 7, so I just hit the go live button on YouTube and will invite you into this time of worship.
There.
As we start, I'll ask that you join me in a prayerful attitude as I read the poem Here by Reverend Sarah R. to center ourselves. There are places our bodies know. The curve of the couch, the creak of the porch swing, the number of steps to our lover's front door. There are places that our bodies know. And then there are places our souls know. Waiting rooms and sanctuaries, nurseries and bedrooms, open roads and dinner tables. These are the travel routes, the many destinations of a well-lived soul. And while my soul would always prefer to stay in the sun, laying on the front porch swings where life is easy, from time to time, we all find ourselves at grief's front door, in love's waiting room, or on the long and treacherous road to justice's house. So when you do, remember, your body can be in a familiar space, while your soul can feel a long way from home. Go easy on her. She is traveling. Being here has never been easy. So a little bit of context to the liturgies, to the readings and questions I have for tonight. Over the summer, while the Black Lives Matter protests were going on around the country, I took to reading James Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree. James Cone is regarded as one of the founders of American liberation theology, specifically Black liberation theology. And the general premise of the book was that we are called to remember that each time a black body in particular is lynched, we are crucifying Jesus along with that act. A lot of liberation theology in the past few years has expanded on that by calling us to remember that we collectively re-crucify Jesus whenever we explicitly or implicitly see the death of any person suffering under oppression. Whether we know it or not, participation in the society that perpetuates these atrocities indicts us in the sins of the acts committed. So I invite you that through this lens, we might remember Jesus' last 19 hours or so of life as we go through our readings this evening. So I'll share my screen. You'll see a bullet point 1 with the scripture beneath it. If one of you is so willing to read the scripture, I would encourage you to do so. And then I'll ask you the question and sing a brief hymn as you consider the question before we respond. But here it is. Should be able to see the first reading there. If someone would like to read, I invite you to go ahead.
Matthew 26, 36, 1, 41.
Yep.
Then Jesus went with them to a place called Samaria, and said to the disciples, "Stay here while I go over there and pray." Jesus took away Peter, James, and John and started to feel grief and anguish. And he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Please stay here and stay awake with me." Jesus went on a little further and fell prostrate in prayer. Abba, is it possible? Let this cup pass me by, but not what I want, what you want. When Jesus returned to the disciples, he found them asleep. Said to Peter, couldn't you stay awake with me for even an hour? Be on guard and pray that you may not undergo the trial. The spirit is willing, the body is weak. Consider a person in your life who is having difficult time at the moment. Take a piece of paper and write or open a document and write a prayer for them as I sing with me in the 2198.
Thank you, Bruce. I'll stop the screen share. So sort of as I alluded to there, as an exercise, either compose in your mind or on a piece of scrap paper or a Word document, a letter to a friend that you care about. Imagine what you would say, and I hope that you make it as profound as you're comfortable with today. And while you're doing that, I'll sing a song so there's not too much blank space. Stay with me, remain with me, watch and pray, watch and pray. Stay with me, remain here with me, watch and pray, watch and pray. It always goes so much better in practice than it does in mind. And it's always a little bit different when people are present as well. I will read the second passage. If you're working on a letter, I invite you to continue working on it. But the second passage for this evening is Mark 14, verses 43 to 46. And I'll share my screen again so that's in front of you. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a crowd carrying swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, the religious scholars, and the elders. The betrayer had arranged this signal for them: "Whomever I embrace is the one. Arrest him and take him away under guard." Judas went directly to Jesus, embraced him, and said, "Rabbi." At this, they laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. In a response outside of Scripture. Again and again, we betray one another and God. We confess our part in the fragmentation of the human family, and we lament our brokenness. So as that sets in, as we place ourselves in Judas's shoes at this moment, that letter, whether it was imaginary or physical, I invite you to rip it up, whether you're ripping it up in your minds or physically ripping it up. As you rip it up, pay attention to how that feels. Hold on to the pieces either in your mind or in your hands, and consider the repercussions to that relationship. And as you're considering, I will sing another hymn. Kyrie, Kyrie, eleison. Kyrie, Kyrie, eleison. Christe, Christe, eleison. Christe, Christe, eleison. So in that little bit of time, what did it feel like to rip up that letter? What did it feel like?
Felt like what I was going to say. I could now find better words to say. And that although I know many parts of it need to be said, I need to put it in the proper perspective for this friend. If we think of the time that we're at, this time of Judas putting his hands on Jesus and embracing him so that he could be arrested and taken away. And then if we think of the trial and the walking with the tree and the hanging from the tree and then death, and we think about the trials that many of us go through in life and how that trial was very deep and very hard and very painful. And we look forward to a bright day that's coming. Confusion in between, naturally, but a bright day coming. And the confusion is typical after something terrible happens. We have a lot of confusion. And then sometimes we can see a bright day ahead.
That's a refreshing interpretation. That ripping it up allows us to do something better thereafter, even though it might have felt awful in the act of ripping it up. Are there other feelings that came with imagining ripping up that letter or ripping up that letter to a friend? For me,
I believe I'm the only one to speak here.
it's
Well, I felt
I
the
don't know about
opposite.
anybody else, but I missed something previously when he asked us to write, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got scrap paper and a pencil, but I didn't quite catch what we were supposed to be writing. So that's why I didn't have anything to rip up.
She got an excuse for not doing her homework.
it works.
Years ago when I was in school, I always did my homework. So I was just kind of meditating rather than writing and then ripping. I don't know about Lee and Bob, but
Well, I felt sort of bad about ripping it up because you're writing this letter to this person and then you rip it up. I mean, we didn't send it yet.
Feels like there's so much potential for good to come out of it, but it's being torn apart.
Yeah.
Be warned for next year. This is part of a experiential walk through this service. It's adapted for Zoom by me today, but this is meant to be set up in 10 stations around a sanctuary so that you can actually walk through each station and consider them at your own speed and time. So next year, the church will be open all day with contemplative music playing in the sanctuary, but you're stuck with my interpretation of it for a Zoom meeting this time. The next reading is Matthew chapter 26, verses 69 through 75. I'll put it up on the screen. I invite one of you to read it aloud. There are questions in the bullet points thereafter. So I'll stop you when you get to the last verse and then read the questions and ask you to consider them as I play a hymn again. So here's the next reading of Matthew 26, verses 69 to 75.
I'll read. While this was happening, Peter was sitting in the courtyard. One of the attendants came over and said, "You were with Jesus the Galilean too, weren't you?" But Jesus denied it in front of everyone. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." When Peter went out to the gate, another attendant saw him and said to those nearby, "This one was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he cursed and denied it. "I don't know him." A little while later, some bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You certainly are one of them. Even your accent gives you away." At that, Peter began cursing and swore, "I don't know the man." Just then a rooster began to crow, and Peter remembered the prediction Jesus had made. "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." Peter went out and cried bitterly.
Thank you, Lee. So there's a series of questions here that I'm just highlighting. Again and again, we turn our backs on each other. Even when we are not willfully malicious, we fail the human family through our fear and timidity. Sometimes we just don't want to be bothered with the world's ills. How often do we turn our backs on human suffering? Who could we become if we refuse to turn away? As you think about those questions, I'll play the entirety of the hymn that I just played a half of, and leave the questions up so you can read them as I play. Kyrie, Kyrie, eleison. Kyrie, Kyrie, eleison. Christe, Christe, eleison. Christe, Christe, eleison. Kyrie, Kyrie, eleison. Kyrie, Kyrie, eleison. Eleison. So what are your thoughts or your reactions to those questions?
Well, what came to mind for me, I guess, is given what I've been doing the last couple of months, and actually kind of what I've been doing all my adult life, in a way, is how the white power structure has turned its back on a whole segment of society for centuries, really. And that's what comes to my mind in your question there. Kind of not being willing to admit that there are issues that need to be taken care of, and staying in our comfort zone and not helping that large segment of society be the best it can. Playing out right here in Troy with the police issue right now.
And all over the country.
Exactly, yeah.
Other thoughts on those questions that were up?
I think there are many times when we deny the people who we have identified with. We don't want to be associated with them for whatever reason, because of whoever is watching us. And we sort of deny them and walk away from them. And was it Peter, I think, that denied Christ 3 times? Got that right? Before the rooster crowed. And afterwards, we feel very guilty about it. Hopefully. And then maybe we learn from that to not deny it, to work towards, such as Bob was saying, a topic, a subject, a change that needs to move forward, and put ourselves out there. When you go to make change, you put yourself out, and there's a good chance you're going to fall on your face, or get seriously injured, or lose something, or people in power can take advantage of you in some way, and it's always a risk to cause change to happen, to make right what is wrong.
Absolutely.
Can't believe the 2 ladies have nothing to say here.
It's a heavy and contemplative series of questions. It gets heavier from here. But the next question will be...
tough questions, Paul.
They are. So a little aside, on Instagram, one of the pages I follow, of course, is United Methodist Memes. So this was a picture of what you'd picture as a modern hipster monk. So a big jolly guy with a curly beard and a red flannel shirt that basically is making the point that liberal Christianity doesn't make sense of Good Friday. And my comment to that was very much a stance on my perspective of liberation theology that I gave at the beginning of this, that no, Jesus didn't absolutely have to suffer and die on the cross from what I understand, but we ought to feel the feels of this day, and we ought to feel the feels of this day every day, as we consider all of those who needlessly die, who needlessly suffer, who needlessly go through torture as Christ did, for trying to live, for trying to be fully beloved children of God in whatever part of the world they're suffering in. So that's, after looking at this for a week, that's the heavy feels that were set on my heart as preparing this, at least. So I'll share my screen again. This time the reading will come from Mark chapter 15, verses 1 through 5 and 15. This is an abridged Stations of the Cross. There could be twice as many, or twice as long readings at each of these. So,
That's one of those.
sharing my screen again. If someone is willing to read Mark 15, 1 through 5 and 15, and stop before the bullet points, please go ahead.
As soon as it was daybreak, the chief priests, the elders, and the religious scholars, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus and led him away and handed him over to Pilate, who interrogated him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. Jesus responded, "You are the one who is saying it." The chief priests then brought more accusations against him. Pilate interrogated Jesus again. "Surely you have some answer." So he made accusations that were leveling were leveling against you. But to Pilate's astonishment, Jesus made no further response. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and after having Jesus scourged, and handed him over to be crucified. My glasses here.
Well, and my typos. I noticed a couple in that one.
Yeah.
So the question for this is, who else are we willingly sending to death? In what way does our society as a whole willingly send people to a slow death? I will play the first verse of Were You There? As we consider those questions. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? So what are your thoughts or feelings on that question?
Well, my anti-war genes come out on this one. We're willing to send people to war for no reason at all. In some cases, we did that when we invaded Iraq. That was totally unnecessary. But our leaders willingly sent people to their death.
We've been doing that for quite some time, I have to say.
Well,
But
that's nothing wrong.
with my generation, it was Vietnam, and many people went over there to save democracy. From what, we don't know, nobody ever said. But the whole thing could have been avoided because the leader of Vietnam wanted nothing else but for the French to get out and for everyone else to leave them alone and let them be their own country. And they hadn't been their own country in quite some time. The French had run the place, and then the Japanese had gone in, and then we brought the French back for some reason. Don't know why, except for the rubber. We wanted rubber from the rubber plants, and that was the only place to get it. And 54,000 young men died. I don't know how many were wounded and died under horrible deaths later on in life. And we've done that. Every generation's had their spot to go, where politicians thought it was good, or where the money people thought it was a good idea to start a war here, and they'll bring in some money for us. I agree, Bob. It's a horrible thing, and most of the time the leaders' sons and daughters do not go. And the slow death, I think about that with what we do in our prisons. And I look at what they're doing in, I think it's Sweden, where they have a whole different outlook on prisons and much more about education and teaching people how to be better people and spending time rather than checking them every day for turning a toothbrush into a knife. And almost entirely everybody that gets out says they are never going back. They're going to go do this and that and the other thing and work and be productive citizens, and they do. But slow, angry, and other slow deaths are the places where we don't support our schools, the young people, or we don't support healthcare people, and they slowly die away without anybody caring in the richest nation in the world, or what was the richest nation in the world.
My immediate thought as I wrote that was just how difficult it can be to find a consistent source of food sometimes. Whether it's a person living in an inner city and just not able to get to a grocery store that sells anything but bags of chips, or whether you're a poor rural American who can't drive to a food bank. Just how difficult it can be to just buy food.
Another example of death, of course, is the more than 550,000 people who died in the U.S. of COVID, and some of the doctors now are saying that had we handled that differently from the beginning, had the president's policies been different, had his attitudes been different, had he taken the thing more seriously, we might have kept that at 100,000. So
Right.
Here's 500 or 450,000 people who were killed essentially because of one man's incompetence.
Right. Right. Very true.
Could have been avoided. I don't know if those numbers are accurate or not, but telling us that we could treat it with Clorox and crap like that,
Plastic Clorox, there you go.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the atrocity that people like me who have relatively cushy jobs at a desk were rather safe, whereas those who are unable to find work outside of a grocery store, or delivering food, or picking up trash are the communities most profoundly affected. So our fifth reading jumps over to the book of John, chapter 19, verses 1 to 3. I will share my screen again and invite one of you to read up until the question. But here is the next reading.
So Pilate ordered that Jesus be flogged. Then the soldiers wove a crown out of thorns and put it on his head and dressed him in a purple robe. They went up to him repeatedly and said, "All hail the Lord." I think it's the Lord.
That should be the
Jews.
King of the Jews. Yeah, that's a
And
special
they
one.
struck him in the face. Sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry about that.
The last letter went down instead of up.
Yeah. So the question I have for you after I sing a verse of the first song again is it too late for us to set things right? What are the thoughts and feelings you have as everything is just going wrong? Stay with me, remain here with me. Stay with me, remain here with me, watch and pray, watch and pray. So what are your thoughts or feelings with that question?
I don't know if everything went wrong. As a child, I did. After reaching the beyond adulthood part, I think close to now, in age, I think about what would needed to happen in order to create a following of people that were going to change their lives and the way they live their lives. And they change what's important to them. And going through this horrible death and preparation for death, the whole part from pilot on through, and then the rising from the dead, becoming alive and going to heaven, and convincing the followers to change their lives and to become something they were not before. I think that they needed to go through that. They needed to make that happen. Jesus needed to die in this way so that he might live. And I think Pilate and the others were part of the tools. They didn't think about that. They were just getting rid of a nuisance. That's all they were thinking about. There's a nuisance, let's get rid of this nuisance. Ask the crowd, who do you want to save? It's the religious guy, right? This one or that one? Let's take that one. The crowd, someone they knew. They didn't want to take somebody they didn't know. So he died. But then he was able to rise from the dead and then go to heaven and guarantee us ascension if we live our lives properly.
Are there other thoughts or feelings with the questions at that point? Thank you, Bruce, as well.
Fade away, Paul.
I was being quiet and timid there. I apologize. Yeah. Those questions definitely come out of a place of angst in my point of life, looking forward and wondering what, why, and how. So there's that. You're all still hearing me okay, right? No. Very curious. I heard myself through something. Is that any better?
Did you do something with your sound just as I was making it louder on my pad?
Nope, I don't think I
heard
did.
you before, and then I didn't think I pushed it that much, and all of a sudden you were much louder.
Okay.
And I
So
could hear Bruce fine, but I could hardly hear you at all.
interesting. Hopefully you're hearing me somehow. Oh dear.
It's fine now.
Your volume has varied a bit.
Yeah,
Sometimes
keeps going
it's,
up and down.
Each time you finish singing,
Okay. And on
That
my
was the first time that I had missed it.
on my screen it's not there it goes. It finally recognized me for a speaker from the first time since Bruce finished with his response to the question. Hopefully the silicon has sorted itself out, and we'll continue now. Well, with that behind us, I will put up the sixth reading. Whoever would like to read it, feel free. It is from John chapter 19, verses 16 to 22. So we're on to the sixth reading. I would invite any of you to read up until the question again.
Then Pilate handed Jesus over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, carrying his own cross, to what is called the place of the skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. There they crucified him along with two others, one on either side of Jesus. Pilate wrote a notice and had it put on the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The notice in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin was read by many people because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. The chief priests said to Pilate, don't write King of the Jews, but this one said, I am King of the Jews. Pilate replied, I have written what I have written. The end.
So I will sing the next verse of Were You There? I invite you to consider this question as I sing. How would you label Jesus? What has Jesus meant for you through your life? Were you there when they nailed? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? So what are your thoughts and feelings on that question? How would you label Jesus? And what has Jesus meant to you through your life?
For Christians, he's been a role model of how we should live our lives. I think for non-Christians, there are others who have other role models, but for us, he's a role model.
So great example, almost.
I think he lived his life as an example of how God wants us to live. He's open and giving and helpful to others. And then at some point in time, for many of the church leaders, that got changed to one of being royalty, part of royalty. And a lot got added to the simple services, simple ways that Jesus showed to help people and live our lives and what to do. And it became very complex and very expensive for the people to participate. And I think that's part of what Luther was condemning about the church and what he wanted to change. And a lot of times I think we have people who become religious leaders that don't follow the teachings and think they're something more special than others and don't want to get dirty. They want to be held up above. And I think we need to spend more time helping people and working with people, and rather than building something gigantic and big and spending our money on that, we're spending it helping people. And what was the second question, Paul?
What has Jesus meant in your life?
Well, I'd say most of my life I didn't pay much attention at all. But in the last 20 years, I have spent more time thinking about him and learning about him and trying to adapt my life to more in line with what I think he would have wanted me to do.
Other thoughts about how you would label Jesus or what Jesus has meant to you?
I personally can't think of any way to label Jesus. I found that question impossible. But as far as what Jesus has meant to me, I've had an on again, off again relationship through my life too. Um, you know, there have been times when I've totally ignored the fact that I was raised as a Christian many years, and then I come back to it. For a while, I was obsessed with the fact was Jesus a real person? Because at one point I didn't believe that Jesus was real. And then then we got into the historical Jesus and all the all that kind of stuff, and I finally accepted the fact that yeah, Jesus was a real person, but and I do think of him as the most perfect human, perfectly human, completely human. And the other question we asked, what would happen if we never turned away? I think we'd all be saints. I think that would be what would happen if we never turned our backs. We would have to be saints. I don't think that you can constantly be aware of, you can't always be aware of, well, you can't carry that pain and suffering around all the time. Sometimes you have to let it go a little bit for your own sanity.
Yeah.
That's just my thought.
Very true. I think what you had to say, Lee, was very thoughtful, introspective, and can we do miracles? Can we? I think we can.
I am not. At one point I would have definitely said no. I'm not 100% sure anymore, but like I'm not sure of a lot of things.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. But think of, I try to think. I think bringing someone back from the dead, or curing some illness. I don't think I can do that. I don't think many of us can do that. But I think there are many of us who can help somebody to where that person thinks, God, you were a miracle helping me when I needed help. They can't thank you enough. Sometimes they don't realize it for a while that you were the one that really helped them, changed them, saved them from alcoholism, drugs, a bad marriage, whatever, something. Gave them food when they needed food, something. Place to sleep when they needed a place. And I do think some of those little things that we could go out of our way and do and not be afraid of doing sometimes is a miracle to someone else. I think we can do that. We just have to be not afraid to do it.
What is a miracle?
Right, exactly, Bob. Exactly.
I don't know if those things are miracles or not. I kind of doubt that they are.
Well, maybe not to you or to me, but to someone in great need, they might be.
Yeah, it's generous of them to think they're miracles. What difference does it make? I mean, whether it's a miracle or not.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It shouldn't. I don't think Jesus would say, no, let's see. Bob's wife is sick, so I think I'll get a miracle in here. No, I don't think so. I think you're right. We don't think it is. The effect of it might be, such as what you're working on with the Justice Center. Now that might not happen this year or next year, but that will be a miracle to people further down the line.
I don't know. Hadn't happened in 4 centuries.
No,
Why should we believe it's going to happen now?
well, if you don't believe, then why bother?
Uh,
I believe it can change.
and it would take a miracle. And I'm praying that the coverage of the court case currently is having a miraculous effect on people's hearts and minds.
Right.
But that's a big ask as well.
I remember one time brought into my house a group of my friends from one of the clubs I belonged to were very, very, very conservative. Far right. Good people, far right. And at the same time, I had a group of my friends who are very, very, very liberal. And had them all in the house at the same time. We had some food, we had some wine, we had some beer, and we had a bottle of Irish whiskey. I know it'll give you a smile, Bob. And
Are
you
you
know
like,
what? After they had a little of that, they all started talking, and they all found things that they believed together, and beliefs that they had that were the same, or very similar to the point where they could put aside the labels that they had on them. It was very interesting to watch.
was that a miracle or was it the Irish whiskey?
Well, that could have been what got put in the bottle. It was a good 12-year-old.
Fair enough. Well, I will share the next reading. This will be Luke chapter 23, verses 39 through 43. And I will invite whoever feels led to read the passage up to the quotes that I have on the bottom of the page.
One of the criminals who hung there beside him insulted Jesus to saying, "Are you really the Messiah? Then save yourself and us." But the other answered the first with a rebuke. "Don't you even fear God? We are only paying the price for what we have done, but this one has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your glory." Jesus replied, "The truth is, today you will be with me in paradise."
So these are 3 quotes from people that were executed in Texas that Sanctified Art put together for this Stations of the Cross liturgy. The first quote is the last words of Justin Hall, executed by the state of Texas on November 6th, 2019. Yeah, I want to address the Roundtree family and apologize for the pain and suffering I caused. And to the Diaz family, that I had put you through this. It should have never happened. And to my mom and Morelia, I love you, and I'm going to miss you all. I'm ready. These are the last words of Arturo Diaz, executed by the state of Texas on September 26, 2013. I hope that this serves as an example for the youngsters. Think about it before you make a bad decision. Let's go, Warden. I'm ready. And finally, these are the last words of George Whitaker III, executed by the state of Texas on November 12th, 2008. First off, I'd like to say to Mr. and Mrs. Carrier, I apologize for your pain and suffering. I pray, Lord, please forgive me. And finally, the question, how would you like Jesus to remember you? I'll ask you to consider that question as I play a short Taizé hymn. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. So how would you like Jesus to remember you?
Yes, is a person that tried to do better. And to move his life forward from making money, doing better, helping people.
I know that we're nowhere near the vulnerable state of those hanging beside Jesus or the three men whose last words we read. But are there ways that you hope Jesus remembers you nonetheless?
Well, to ask Jesus to remember you, you have to contemplate your own death. That's a pretty hard thing to ask people to do. I think that I think I'd like to be remembered as generous. She had a good sense of humor. Um, that kind, nothing real profound, just everyday things.
Other thoughts on how you'd like Jesus to remember you?
Got that hard answer without seeming to self-aggrandize, I think. For a long time I've been interested in social justice and that kind of thing. I'd like to believe that by the time I go, I will have accomplished something in that area and other areas too. Who knows?
Well, as we continue to progress onto the last three readings, I'll share my screen again. I'll ask another person to read, and then I'll try to share a YouTube video with you all, so just warning of perhaps some rocky screen sharing. But in the meantime, I'll share my screen again. If someone is willing to read John 19, verses 25 to 27, feel free to do so.
Standing close to Jesus.
Oh, sorry, Bruce.
No, go ahead. I already read. Go ahead.
Standing close to Jesus' cross were his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Here is your son." Then he said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." From that moment, the disciple took her into his household.
So I will share this video and then share the images that are being painted throughout the video. But this is an artist who lives in St. Louis, processing processing Breonna Taylor's death through this painting, also remembering Emmett Till's mother's testimonies as she is doing the painting. So, can you all see the YouTube page okay? I'll take that as a yes, hopefully. So this is a 3-minute YouTube video that I pray you will prayerfully engage with.
2020 can be counted by many of us, I think, as one of the worst years of our lives, if not the worst. For me, it just felt like a constant, unending Good Friday experience where you're a witness to horror after horror after horror without any apparent end or relief. We had moved to Louisville, Kentucky the year prior, so it hadn't yet been a year for us when the COVID-19 pandemic emerged. And for as much as the pandemic stopped in our lives, it couldn't stop everything. For instance, it couldn't stop this practice of extrajudicial killings of Black people, and Louisville, Kentucky found itself as one of the epicenters of racial unrest in America. And as things were ramping up in the case against the police officers who were involved in the issuing of the not warrant the night Breonna was killed, we were also nearing the anniversary of Emmett Till's murder. And I was just wondering what about that is pertinent. There feels like there's something here. And as a creative, the way I lean into grief is to create through it. And I wanted to create through this. You think back on the events of 1955 and what Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley did and how that catalyzed a movement. It's just unthinkable that we are still wrestling with these very issues that took her son from her. And I just needed to paint through that. And with 2020 feeling like a Good Friday experience, I think of Jesus's words in John's Gospel, talking about that day where he says to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And there's no indication who he's talking about, if he's talking about himself or the beloved disciple. But what would it mean for Mary to look at her son as he's being lynched? Because he was being lynched. What kind of fortitude would that take? Where would you have to go? And so I dove into Mrs. Till Mobley's narrative to see what it took for her. What does it take to witness that horror? And how long will it take for us to pay attention to what it does to her and to other mothers?
So bear with me a moment as I pull up the images. Once I have the images that she was painted up, I will ask the questions that go along with these images. And I'll read all of these questions at once, and I will read them slowly, and I invite you to enter a meditative, prayerful attitude as I read these questions. What do you notice as you look at these images? What do you feel? How are you being drawn into this work? Who have been the mothers after Mamie Till Moby who have experienced similar violence? Who is God calling us to behold today? How will we respond? Amen. So what are your thoughts or your feelings as we look at these images and consider those questions? I can put the questions up. I'll stop the share and I will switch to the questions. Yeah, need to go back to here. So here are the questions that I asked. But what did you think about the images? How did you feel? What did you notice, or what were you drawn into as you looked at those pictures? Or the paintings, rather.
Well, I'm assuming that the woman was the mother and the male figure behind her was the son. And that was a case I wasn't familiar with, so I'm assuming he was killed. But there was the element of the love of the mother for the son, and with the way the arms came around, that even though he was gone, he was still very much with her. And it's very similar to, in many ways, to Christ on the cross, because even though officially he was gone, he was still, not only back then, but even now today, 2,000 years later, is still very much with us.
Absolutely. Other thoughts or feelings on the paintings, or the artist's reflections as she painted in that time lapse that we saw?
What was the second picture supposed to represent? Was the male figure? There were several male figures around her. As I said, that was a case I obviously was not familiar with, but were there others around, or were they simply to represent male figures supporting her?
I'm not positive. I'm not positive if that was Emmett Till's mother falling in grief before other people, or if that was supposed to be Breonna Taylor and referencing her her significant other in that case and the police that entered her apartment that night. I'm not positive which one that was.
Yeah.
What I feel most indicted by this series of questions is the question of who have been the mothers after Mamie Till Mowbray, who have experienced similar violence. And for me, it's the heartbreaking answer of I just don't know. At some point, I will preach on one of the experiences I had with my seminary trip to Turkey. One of the places we visited was the the Church of Mary, the mythical place where she and the beloved disciple fled to after this, and what it meant to be standing in the baptismal fonts of the ruins around Mary's church, and what that fleeing symbolizes as an act of faith as well. But holding on to that tension of the mothers, the siblings, the loved ones that continue to be affected by these atrocities as well. While we're here, would one of you be willing to read the 9th reading from Luke 23, verses 44 to 46?
It was about noon, and darkness fell on the whole land until 3 p.m. because of an eclipse of the sun. Then the curtain in the sanctuary was torn in two, and Jesus uttered a loud cry and said, Abba, in your hands I commit my spirit. Saying this, Jesus breathed his last time.
With that remembering breath, and remembering some of these recent atrocities, I will chime a chime as I read each of these names, and then invite you to join me as in a moment of silence. But the names that follow are people that spoke their last breath, saying, I can't breathe. So, Christopher Lowe, Eric Garner, Derek Scott, Javier Ambler II, Byron Williams, Manuel Ellis, Elijah McLean, John Newville, George Floyd, and the countless others that we may not have taken the time to learn their names. I'll ask that you continue this silent prayer as I sing the next verse of Were You There? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Since we're still here, would one of you be willing to read our final reading of Matthew chapter 27, verses 57 to 60? Once the reading is concluded, I'll ask that you hold another moment of silence.
When evening fell, a wealthy man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had become a disciple of Jesus, came to request the body of Jesus. Pilate issued an order for its release. Taking the body, Joseph wrapped it in fresh linen and laid it in his own tomb, which had been hewn out of rock. Then Joseph rolled a huge stone across the entrance of the tomb and went away.
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? So a closing benediction before we go forth in silence to await the anxiety of tomorrow. Do not look away. Do not rush to redeem this violence. Do not carry on as if nothing is wrong. Grieve this. Mourn this. Sit with this. And if you cannot, sit and mourn with those who mourn. Grieve with those who grieve. Go in peace, understanding that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. May God's Spirit direct you to create the kind of justice that was denied to Jesus on this day. Amen. Go in peace. I look forward to seeing you all Easter Sunday.